a rush of reality came in. And in that instant, it felt like my true self, the universe, God, became lucid and looked out through my eyes.
Gareth Duignam, welcome to Passion Harvest. Really looking forward to our conversation today. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on your show. It's a pleasure.
I've done some research and I've looked at the work you do. It's incredible. I'd love to start for the audience with, I guess, in the concepts of time, your profound spiritual awakening.
Well, my spiritual awakening, it kind of unfolded by itself. I was never seeking enlightenment or any sort of awakening. I didn't even know what spiritual awakening was. I had been an avid meditator and I had had some out of body experiences prior to the awakening, but nothing that ever made me feel like that I was a spiritual seeker seeking anything. I had a business. I was very happy. One morning, I got up to go to the gym about 7 a.m. and I entered the the doors, went upstairs, and I had this feeling that I was being watched, like something was watching me, something, it felt like music was trying to get my attention, my surroundings were somehow trying to, I don't know, almost grab my awareness. And I kind of stopped for a moment, and it was a really sunny morning, and the sun was coming in through the windows. And for some reason, I noticed the sun, and I said to myself that the sun is not outside of me. The sun is actually inside of my consciousness. And then I listened to the music. I became aware of the music in the gym and the noises and the clanking of the weights. And I said the same thing. I said, them sounds, they're not external, they're inside of me, inside of my consciousness. And as I said that, I felt it almost felt like two pieces of Velcro were pulled apart inside of my mind, like a ripping sensation and a ripping sound. And a rush of reality came in. And in that instant, it felt like my true self, the universe, God, became lucid and looked out through my eyes. And it was like all of this knowing and supreme knowledge started to flood in. It was like, oh, I've been dreaming. I fell asleep and I dreamt myself into this character, Gareth, with all his worries about his business and family, and all of that had been a dream. And it was like my mouth opened and I was like, and I started to look around. And then I started to realize that I was the sun, I was the sounds, I was the walls, the machines, everything was me. So I had become lucid through this form, the supreme intelligence had become lucid through me. And then it started to realize that it was also everything that it was perceiving. And that extended to people as well. So I started to look at the people and I started to realize that what had awoken in me was what was in everybody, but it was still asleep in the others. That went on for a couple of minutes. It became very overpowering, overbearing. I started to have tears started to run down my face. I had to sit down. And it became too much. I picked up my bag and I walked out of the gym and I got into the car and I started driving to work. And I had the most beautiful drive ever. And this really profound experience has started to kind of close down as time passed by, as as I got closer to work. It was about an hour drive into work. And eventually I got into work and I kind of felt more normal, but I still had this beautiful day. And the next morning I woke up, I was different. Um, the aperture had closed down. It was like what I now know as it was a God realization. God had perceived itself through my form that had closed down, and I was now left in a state of self-realization. There was a deep sense of peace and a sense of unbounded awareness at the center of what I was. And it seemed that the identification with my ego had snapped. So my ego was still there, but this pull that was always kind of pulling me and it making me feel uneasy, it had broken. And from that day on, I fear was gone. All my psychological fear was just dissolved. I never worried. I never felt anxious, um, and just a deep sense of peace. And that was the start of me then becoming a seeker. I had this experience where I tasted what it was to be God, or what God was, to look out through my form. And I was like, I want to find that again. So that led me then on a 5-year journey through the stages of awakening.
Wow. So how do you operate in this reality or this world that we call reality?
Yeah, so that's I actually get asked that quite a bit from people. They get worried that, that the if their ego isn't there, how do they operate? And it's not that the ego ever really disappears. It's just the identification with the ego breaks. So you can still use your mind and you can still use your intellect at will. You can come back into the world. You can use that analytical part of your mind, but at the center of what you are is just unbounded awareness, and you can rest into that space at any moment. You can be in a busy supermarket in a queue, and you can just kind of sink into that at any stage you like. It's always there. It never leaves. It's there when you wake up in the morning. It's there when you're going to bed at nighttime. Always there. And the human part just continues as normal. Um, yeah.
And when people say, "How did you get that? I want that." What's your advice?
Well, spiritual awakening, it's something that actually just happens to you. It really is. Um, I later discovered that I had had previous lives where I had awakened in the previous lives. And I think that was a lot of it. I had, um, been really kind of involved in meditation. I really liked how it made me feel. And I think it kind of just over the years had built up, and it had, kind of led to this awakening. It's kind of like when the fruit is ripe, it just falls from the tree. And it was just my time to awaken.
What's for those of the audience that haven't experienced, what's it like experience, well, we call them past lives or other lives. What's it like?
I mean, so for a long time, leading up to the awakening, I had always had this fear of dying, of death. It was just at the center of what of my psyche. It was like, oh, why am I putting all this effort into this life if it can just be taken away and there's nothing at the end of it? So I always really wanted to find out the answers, and it led me down a journey of I did some past life regression, and I was regressed into some previous lives, but it kind of felt like a daydream, like it wasn't real. And part of me was always questioning, is that me just making that up? Is it something that I just want to experience? So I wanted to have out of body experiences. And when I started to have the out of body experiences, those were real. Those were as real as this reality, if not realer. Um, and as soon as I had an out of body experience, I knew that I do not die. Maybe the body dies, but the essence of what I am lives on. So the past lives, they reveal themselves to me much, much later, through a series of lucid dreams. And They were as real as the out of body experiences. I was fully there. I was, I could see that I was a different person. I could walk around. But they just felt like a story. I experienced them for a brief moment. I had a kind of a sense of who I was in the previous life and where I was. And yeah, you'd come out of them and then the story just fades.
So it's all just a story.
Yes, that's what it feels like. Yeah.
Oh
Maybe
gosh, we
when you're
take our
there.
reality so seriously, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you're there, when you're going through the experience, you can feel it. You can feel the emotion, the sadness of leaving that life. And then it just kind of fades like a dream, like a dream. Yeah.
What's your advice to those that perhaps are grieving the loss of a loved one or suffering, whatever story that may be? What is your advice?
So I've come to know that we are eternal beings and we may drop this physical form, but the essence of our soul and the spark of divinity that's within us, that lives on always and it's never lost. It's just we change form. So I mean, it's always difficult for the person on this side when we lose somebody, but the person who's moved on, it's there's no sadness, there's no real loss. It's just change.
So well, this is your show today, but what happens when our physical body dies?
Okay, and so again, going back to the out of body experiences, I discovered that we have a second body and it exists independent of this physical body, and it is a complete replica of our form. So when I was having my out of body experiences, I would have a second body that I could move around in. I could teleport it through my thoughts. I could move it around, I could put my hand through walls. It was just a copy. So I haven't gone through that process of dying. It, but if it's similar to the out of body experiences, we just move almost like just transitioning from this form into the second body. And yeah,
So your out of body experiences, were they in a sleep state?
so they would always initiate from the sleep state. So what would happen was I would wake up with vibrations moving up and down my body, and then I would become aware and awake. And this phenomena would get louder and louder. It would kind of make a whining noise in my ears, and vibrations would move up and down my body. And it would get to a crescendo, kind of a peak. And then I could separate from my physical form and I could move around and explore. Um, those went on for about a year and a half. They would just kind of come 2 or 3 times a week. And I had a lot of fun with it, but there wasn't an awful lot of like spiritual progress.
So you don't do that anymore.
No, they actually stopped quite a while ago.
I know. Well, I've got questions, but you also have experience in between lives.
Yes,
What
yes.
what happens in between lives?
So from the spiritual awakening that I had in the gym, I then started to discover that there was levels and stages to the awakening process. And over the next 5 years, I started to move through these various stages, self-realization, there was unity consciousness, and so on and so on. And towards the end of the awakening process, I started to be shown past lives. I had the 3 past lives that I just spoke about, the previous lives. And then one morning, as I was coming out of sleep, I became lucid and I was in a different reality frame and I was no longer human. And the reality, it was sort of blue. Everything was blue, different shades of blue. And there were beings there and they were kind of triangle shaped or cone shaped, and they had small little heads, and I was one of them. And I glided. I didn't have arms and legs. I kind of glided, and communication was done through telepathy. It was I could communicate with other beings there, and they explained to me that I go there in between lives, and I can take time out, and I can plan my next life. And they explained time, the concept of time. There, 20 minutes is the equivalent of a full life here. So they explained to me that when I choose to come into a life here in this earth, that it's 20 minutes. And why wouldn't I come? It's just a 20-minute trip down. And I actually experienced myself coming down that light, the tunnel of light, back into the body. And as I was coming back in, it was like, oh, I kind of it's not like you're tricked, but it's like as you're coming back in, it's like, oh no, now I realize that I have to go through, being a child, learning to walk, talk, be a teenager. And I kind of felt like, oh, I've fallen for it again.
Because the concept of time in our humanness, hours can be very, very long, days and weeks. It can be endless. Do you think we have a choice to reincarnate?
Yes, I seem to have a choice. What was also explained to me was that not all humans were residing in that place, in that place where I was. And it was explained to me that most humans, or a lot of humans, they don't they just come straight back in. So they go through one life and then they're just straight back in to have another experience. And it's only as the quality of our consciousness progresses and evolves that we get the choice in between lives to kind of reflect on our previous life and then choose the next life.
So why? Why are we having all these incarnations?
So it's the quality of our consciousness, and the quality of our consciousness seems to be the fuel that the universe uses to evolve. So it's using us. We are it. We are its parts. We are individual units of the greater consciousness system coming into a physical form to have an experience. So basically, it dreams itself into our individual um, identity. It forgets itself, and then it comes back in to remember itself through this game of life.
It's the ultimate game, isn't it? Gosh.
It really is. Yeah.
How can we play the ultimate game? How can we live our best life? How can we choose whether to return or not?
So that's a really great question. So when we start to discover that this is just the game and that we start to know the rules to the game, then we start to become good at it. Then life starts to kind of flow freely. We do things not from our intellect, but we do it from our beingness, right? We do what feels good. We get a sense of, oh, when I act this way, it's not from my intellectual understanding, all right? I'm not being a good person because society expects that from me, but I'm actually being this way because I actually care, at the center of what I am. It feels good to be nice to people. It feels good to care about people. And then it doesn't feel so rigid and so tight and constrained.
So what are the rules? You mentioned the rules.
So there we have karma, so when we do deeds in the world, those deeds come back to us. So when you get someone who doesn't understand karma, they could be acting out in ways where they then have to go through them lessons to kind of discover how they've acted. It comes back. So eventually as we start to progress, the karma gets less and less, and everything becomes very free flowing.
Which segues me on to your book. Congratulations, Waking Up from the Dream. For those that
Okay.
haven't read it, do you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
So the book came about. I actually had never intended to write a book, but I work with a lot of people online from around the world, and I would have meetings, and for many, many months, a lot of people had asked me, I had made YouTube videos about the different stages of awakening, but people wanted to have something to read about. So I kind of documented my awakening from even going back to the early stages from a child. I kind of had a a teenage life of nonconformity and eventually led me on to spirituality. So I documented a lot of that and the spiritual awakening stages that I went through in the book.
Now, you also, I mean, aside from the book, you also help people awaken from their consciousness and you do healing energy transmissions. What's that about?
Okay, so I I go back to my dad. So my dad was going through a bit of a rough stage about 5 or 6 years ago. He had been a very competitive athlete all his life, and he got injured and he couldn't run anymore, and he kind of became a bit depressed. And I had gone through the awakening at this stage, and I was talking to him quite a bit, and I was kind of telling him about the awakening process and how a lot of the suffering falls away. But no matter what I would say to him, it didn't seem to be able to get through in words. And during my awakening process, there was a number of events happened, and one of them was that I started to kind of communicate with this intelligence at different stages. And I asked, was there a way that I could share this energy or this state of being with people through a transmission or sitting with them meditating? And it turned out that I could. So the intelligence came in, it notified me that I was now able to transmit my state to other people. And I was then able to meet with some friends. I would invite 2 or 3 friends onto a Zoom meeting like this. We would sit, we would meditate. And I realized that I became transmissive. So when people would sit and meditate with me, their state of consciousness became deeper, it was more enriched. And it kind of the analogy that I would use was it was kind of like two logs. If you have one that's smoldering and one that's burning brightly, and you bring the two of them together, the log that's smoldering it's going to catch on fire much quicker. And that kind of went on, 2 or 3 people would turn up, and over the months the group grew and it grew, and then there was 10 and 20 and 30 people. And today there could be 150 people turn up on my Zoom groups and my live streams on YouTube.
Would you be open to sharing an energy transmission with the Passion Harvest audience?
I definitely would. I'm actually glad you've suggested that.
Okay.
So we'll do about 10 minutes. Would that be okay?
Wonderful.
Okay. So just for the viewers and the listeners, so just to let you know that the energy transmission stays in the video. So even if you've come across the recording, you close your eyes, and the video is an interface for you to receive the energy transmission. The energy transmission, it's always there, it always exists, but this video is just your way of interfacing with it and receiving the energy. Okay, I'll start now. Okay, we'll bring our awareness back into our body. Open our eyes. Meditation is over.
I feel very blissed out after that.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I just
That's
felt
wonderful.
waves of energy.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the viewers, they might feel the same. They might sense it just as a wave or a kind of a fuzzy sensation around the body. Yeah. And they might drop a note in the or a comment down below if they felt it.
And I love how you, what we can call it, time locked it. So it doesn't matter if they're watching it in a year from now or a few months, it's still the same activation.
It stays. So I have videos on my YouTube channel that are like 5 and 6 years old, and I still get notifications popping up on my phone, and people are saying, "Wow, I go, how does that work?"
Yeah.
And what I've come to discover is there is no space and time, and the transmission that we just sat in, it just exists always, and people can revisit that by just tuning into this video.
And as you spoke before about time, everything happens at the right time. So whenever it's needed.
Absolutely.
Gareth, I've loved talking to you today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the Passion Harvest audience that I haven't asked you?
Um, what could I share with the guests? So I guess that I'd say a lot of them are meditators and, spiritual seekers, and to just keep connecting to that part of themselves. They may have experienced it in today's meditation. At the center of what we are is unbounded awareness, and that's, our nature is to not suffer and to connect with that part and be that part, and it's available to everybody. And just keep having your meditative practice, and eventually that will come forward and, yeah, lead you in your life.
Mm. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being on Passion Harvest and thank you for that incredible activation.
That's my pleasure. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure. Bye bye.